For 3 years, you heard from me and my expertise, and you still will. But now we want to hear from some of the industry experts, some of the pioneers in this space on what they are seeing and advice they can give you on how to advance and take their career to the next level. So it's an honor and privilege to have Michael coach with us today. Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, my friends. You know what time it is. It is time. Buckle up. Here we go. It is time for Life of a CISO with yours truly. Dr. E is in the house. And as we got so much great feedback on having guests to share their knowledge and expertise, for 3 years, you heard from me and my expertise, and you still will. But now we want to hear from some of the industry experts, some of the pioneers in this space on what they are seeing and advice they can give you on how to advance and take their career to the next level. So it's an honor and privilege to have Michael coach with us today. And Michael, why don't you give a brief intro of who you are, your background, and what you're currently doing?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate the time. Let's see. So a little bit of background on what I'm up to, where I've been. I've been in cybersecurity my whole career. It's been over 20 years now. It's amazing how time flies.
I know it does.
Yeah, I actually cut my teeth getting into the industry as a hacker for hire, legally, of course. I broke into banks, governments, telcos, found the flaws in the systems, showed them to execs so they could patch them before the bad guys actually exploited them. But after doing that for a bit of time, I wondered, what was it like to defend an organization? And so I, moved over to a big organization, I guess we'll say. It was Motorola at the time before they split. So over 100,000 seats. Helped defend the organization from the Security Operations Center. So right in the thick of processing these different events, figuring out what security matters. And that was mind-blowing to begin with. But then found my way out to Silicon Valley. I started at Mozilla, and my goal there was to build the web security program. And eventually I led all of security for Mozilla. So you may be on Chrome today, as they are quite popular. But I was there during the height of the browser wars and, protecting over 500 million users on Firefox against a myriad of attacks around the world, hundreds of websites that we had, a BYOD concept with an open source community before that was even the norm. That was really compelling. I found my way at a startup, as one does in San Francisco. I joined Shape Security for a little bit over a year, and they were doing some really innovative work at the time in anti-bot defense. And I only left there because I was off to be Twitter's first Chief Information Security Officer. Nice. And that is quite a tall order, especially if you're the first one blazing the trail of what does that even mean to have a CISO in the company. And I know we'll talk more about that. But wrapping up where I am now, I left Twitter after a few years on my own terms, which I'm quite proud of as a CISO, and started my own company. So I started a data security company in the emerging cloud space. How do you protect data in this amorphous concept of Google Drive, Microsoft 365? We led that company for a number of years. It was acquired. And then after that, I spent my time at the acquiring company and then in the venture space. So I spend all of my time now helping founders in the cybersecurity space succeed. How can I help them with early capital, with insights, with that hat of a CISO, with that hat as a former founder? And I couldn't be more excited. And the only thing I skipped over, which hard to skip over, was a wonderful nearly 8 years at OWASP. OWASP is a fantastic organization. I was fortunate enough to be the chairman of the board for a number of years and just a volunteer helping promote secure code to the world. So that's the nutshell of where I've been, but lots of things to dig in along the way.
Exactly. Yeah, so many nuggets. So let's tackle a few of those. So first one is sort of one of my general theories is, security hasn't changed that much. It's just attackers have gotten faster and quicker because vulnerabilities are vulnerabilities and open issues are open issues. What do you think of that? Do you think the state of cybersecurity in terms of really how to defend and protect our systems have changed a lot, or is it really just keeping pace with the evolving threats?
What continues to change all the time is the acronyms. And for a while, I was like, I feel like such a poser. I don't know what that acronym is. let me tell you, I've been in the field for over 20 years. I will still not at a hesitation say, what do you mean by that acronym? And the reason I mention that is, although those acronyms change, what they really boil down to is the same base security principles with a different scope and different landscape and technology. So when someone's like, oh, CTEM, Cloud Threat Exposure Management, I believe, or no, Continuous Threat Exposure Management. I think that's what that one stands for. Like, all right, understanding your exposure, what vulnerabilities you have, I get it. Or something with cloud, like, okay, we're thinking about vulnerabilities, but in the context of cloud. So I think to your point, the fundamental concepts do hold true. And so as people are advancing in this field, learning the basics is huge. And then it's about understanding the nuances of the technology. So you can say, well, what does make sense for identity and authorization in a cloud context, or in a non-human identity context, or in an AI context? And you can give it whatever acronyms you want, but think about the first principles. And that is what's challenging. As a CISO, you're trying to have these base security controls, this base oversight and governance, and the world is moving incredibly quickly underneath you.
Yeah, well said, my friend. And I know a lot of folks listening are similar to where you were before you joined Twitter, where they want to become a CISO, but they've never been a CISO before, or they want to start a CISO for a new company. What advice would you give sort of first-time CISOs of how to break into the space? And what are sort of the key skills they need to learn or be super good at in order to get their first CISO gig?
I think in the old world, which we're going back 15 years ago in terms of cybersecurity history, I think in the old world, the CISOs at the time that was the business leader that got tapped to own it, and they didn't really know what it was. And they came from another department, and they did their best to be an exec overseeing a department they didn't really understand, I guess. And the reason I mention that is I think coming up through the technical ranks is a huge advantage because you have an appreciation for the complexity and the details. And one of the things as you're rising up is to become comfortable building great teams and no longer being the smartest person in the room. If you are, that's going to hold you back. And so you need to have this comfort level with saying, I know enough about the base principles, again, to push back and ask questions. That's how you build the great teams around you and empower them. I think hitting a few different disciplines in security is beneficial. If all you've ever seen is application security, you're going to have a tough time when you start to roll under security incident response or enterprise security into your purview. So moving around will help you. The other big thing as you continue to move up is translating from technical security absolute thinking to business risk and shades of gray and what matters to the company. As you get closer to making this first jump into a CISO role, you should really spend time with your finance partners, understand the P&L of the company, understand what matters. How do you make money? Talk to your sales leaders, because your job as a CISO now is to understand the motivation and drivers of every line of the business, every core team, and then be able to talk with them as a partner about risk and find where you draw the line about managing risk. Because as a technical expert, we think about eliminating risk. As a CISO, we think about measuring and managing risk. And eliminating it means you have a business that doesn't move. So you got to find the right part, that right balance for your risk management.
Yeah, and so spot on. I go in and if you can't read a balance sheet and understand a P&L statement, you can't be a chief officer. Right? Chief officer first, information security after that. But one thing a lot of people don't realize when they become that chief officer, it can come with liability. Like we're starting to see cases with Uber and others where the CISO is actually being sued and there's civil and criminal charges being against them. How do you manage and handle that aspect of it, the chief officer side that many people are not used to? And how do you avoid liability or exposure?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very important and real role. I mean, you're an officer at a company, especially if it's a public company. There are grave concerns if you make public misstatements that people may trade on, and that is where things can blow back. Or if you are the voice to an audit, a third party, a three-letter agency. And so there's a few things you want to do. I mean, one, you want to have a tight relationship with your legal team. Every organization I've been at, legal and I are best friends because we work together and we think about demystifying realities. We think about shades of gray, and you really want to partner with them closely. The other thing is, obviously, you just want to operate truthfully, and that should go without saying.
Transparency. Yep, transparency. Tell the truth.
I think if you find yourself in a situation, and I guess this is a good concrete example, if you have a data breach, and you will, they unfortunately happen often, but if you have one, the breach response and the public statement is a combined activity between security, legal, and comms. It should not be in any one of their courts on their own. For example, I've seen this happen where legal wrote something up. They're like, "Oh yeah, don't worry, public. The passwords are encrypted," and that might sound good from a legal perspective. Encryption is good, but as you're listening to that, your mind might be exploding. Like, what do you mean you encrypted the passwords? Nobody encrypts passwords. You store them in a one-way hash with bcrypt or PBDK, whatever that one is. And so that's like an example of a nuance. And similarly, if security writes the breach response on your own, you may put your foot in your mouth and open the door for all sorts of other legal considerations. So when thinking about liability, team approach, don't sign off on things that you feel uncomfortable about. Raise a concern. Understand D&O insurance. You should definitely have that. And if something feels wrong, don't just let that sit.
Well said, well said. Now, what would you say was the biggest lesson learned over your career? Like what's one thing, and I know everyone asks this, but it's a great question. If you sort of could go back to yourself of 20 years ago, what would sort of be one or two pieces of advice you would give to it or you would do differently moving forward?
One big lesson I learned was about, I think it was perspective around risk as a CISO.
Okay.
And at a point in time, I finally realized my goal, especially at Twitter, things were moving fast everywhere. We had 6,000 employees. This was 2014 to 18. We had presidential election. We had nation state adversaries. My goal was not to eliminate all risk. That's for sure. I talked about that before. But what I found out was my goal was to make sure the board and the executives were aware of our current posture and we were making the trade-offs we wanted to make. And I realized that I would consider it a failure mode, not if one of the security incidents happened that we had planned for. So, all right, we knew this was a trade-off. We decided to prioritize X over Y dollars, driving down this other risk. If that happened, that's just the trade-off coming to bear. But what I realized was if a breach happened that I had not prepared the board for, that was a possibility, that would be a failure mode. So it was about surfacing the what ifs. And what that starts to do is it starts to make you think about the entire plane that you have to deal with. Where does all your data live? Where are all your connections? What are all the different things that could go wrong so that you can put a methodological approach to it, methodical approach to it to figure out what risk levels are of most concern. And I think before going through that, I didn't realize how much that became a top priority. A second thing that I realized was that so much of the CISO role is, on one hand, technical expertise, but on the other hand, human behavior. There are so many situations when you are trying to convince another business partner to do something that is not in their course of work, and you're convincing them to do it. So that social engineering work that I had at the beginning of my career actually came in pretty handy. Not because I was trying to social engineer people, but I was trying to give them the information to make them want to do the things I wanted to do. So much of it was kind of organizational jujitsu in addition to deep technical knowledge.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Now, you mentioned technical expertise, which I agree with. Now, one thing I got criticized is that, to me, ideal CISOs is somebody with 3 to 5 years experience, because the longer you do tech, the harder it is to switch. Do you agree or disagree? And what is sort of your sweet spot that you found? How many years do you need to do tech before it's time to switch over to a CISO?
I don't know if there's an upper limit on that. I think it comes back to what you enjoy as an individual.
Yep.
It's sort of like that switch from an IC to a manager. If you like having your hands in the code all day, switching to a manager or a leadership role in that line is not going to be interesting to you. Um, but if you're ready for that activating people through influence and through empowerment, and you want to switch into more of a risk mindset, I think I think that 3 to 5 years would be. I think that would be actually pretty fast paced. So if you can do it,
Yep.
great. But I wouldn't feel that you're at a disadvantage if you've been in technical roles or leading technical teams or even directors and it's been 8, 10 years. I think you're actually be well suited. It's just about finding that right first CISO job. For example, you're not going to go be the CISO at Google as your first role. I mean, one, it's filled. I think Phil's still there. But two, you need to find kind of that right size of a place to start. So it's all about finding that right opportunity.
So sort of two general paths. One is to be a CISO at a small company and move up. The other one is to go to a big company, but be the director of security or deputy CISO, and then move up to a CISO in 5 to 10 years. Do you have a preferred recommendation, or which one have you seen to be more successful?
I think if you can, I think you should go to the most exciting company that just motivates you day to day. I mean, at the end of the day, there's not a right path for anyone, but the wrong path is certainly something where you're like, this is not enjoyable. I don't feel motivated.
Yeah,
I
do what
don't
you love.
enjoy
Do what you
going to
love.
work.
I love it.
Yeah, so I think that's really important. With that in mind, if you're at a small company, I would say pick a high growth small company. Go into like a D stage startup. And by D stage, like there's considerable revenue. They have their several year plan to IPO and such. Like there's a lot of exciting things that's going to happen. And that's a great place to go be a first security leader. They also generally want somebody that has more hands on skills, anyhow. So I think that's one option. Alternatively, yeah, if you go be a director in a security team at a big company, it may be slower moving. You're going to get thrown into the deep end of organizational dynamics and politics and this and that. Those are good things to know. So I think they're both good paths. You just want to expose yourself to exciting challenges. So I'd keep that as the base driver.
And then who should the CISO report to? I mean, another thing is, I'll let you answer it and I'll give my opinion. So who should the CISO report to? And in what cases is it a bad reporting structure?
Several years ago, so one thing that exists in the CISO world is we have these CISO support groups. Let's just call it that. We literally have Slack channels with a few hundred CISOs, and we use it to say, hey, wait, are you seeing this? Are you seeing that? And then also a little bit of venting. But one thing I did in that group years ago was let's talk about reporting chains. Like, what are people seeing that works? What's not working? And as we did an inventory, what we found out was there was no dominant answer. Now, this was across higher tech firms. So it's not like we were overwhelmed by, like, let's say the fintech, the financial industry. So maybe there's pockets where it's more homogenous. But we found that it was all sorts of different structures. In my past, I have reported to the CFO, the VP of Eng, the CTO, the CEO. So I've been in a lot of different structures. The one overwhelming point that matters is, does your reporting structure help you influence and get things done? That's the number one most important thing. The number 2 point is, because of your reporting structure, do you find a conflict of interest, not just in potential or academic sense, but in like actual day-to-day practice? And if you do, that's a problem too. I would say in the higher tech firms, you want to be closer to technology. Because that's how you get things done. So reporting to the CTO worked just fine for me. Also, when I reported to Jack at Twitter for the majority of my time, that worked fine too. Because when somebody comes knocking on our door and says, "Hey, we have to work on this," I'm like, "Oh, you report to Jack? Well, okay, let's talk."
Nice.
So I think it depends a lot on the organization, but CEO is fine. You'll get less of their time. They have a lot to do. CTO is good in high tech orgs. Reporting to legal can work. It's not the craziest idea. The other thing about reporting structures is I actually think you should have IT report to security. And I don't think everyone agrees with that, but those two
Amen,
teams,
amen, amen.
yeah, there we go. Got a believer. Like fundamentally, technology has to work and it has to be secure. So they can't be butting heads. They have to just figure it out. So make it one reporting structure. Yeah, I think that's what I've seen so far.
Nice. Now, and you nailed it, which is a natural follow on, is a lot of people, especially security engineers, always, or business units, view cyber as a disabler. Like we're the people who say no, we're the people who say you can't do it. We slow down innovation, we slow down change. But I'm sort of a big fan of security as a business enabler. How do you view that, and what are things you can do to actually make security increase functionality, not decrease it?
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I'd like to think we're moving around the curve, the bend on this way of thinking, but there are definitely lots of pockets where security is still viewed as the team of no. Part of the reason why I think that has transpired is that if there's a security breach, who do you blame? And if for a second you thought the CISO, well, that's why they're the team of no. If they have accountability without authority, all they're going to say is no and not have the ability to influence the change. So I think going back to that area of how I think about security and really sharing this with the exec team of my role is not to prevent all breaches or all security issues because I don't make all decisions. My role is to put in a program that measures it, shares it with you, and we can collectively decide where the bar is for risk. Then you can shift away from the team that says no, because it's not always your neck on the line. I think the rise of AI is a perfect example of where this is going to fully change over. I don't challenge. I dare you hypothetically to stand in front of a company and say, whoa, let's not do this AI thing. It's too scary. Let's step back and measure it. Yes, you will just get straight run over. Yeah. And what's even worse is if you are right, the competition will run you over. So the answer here is to say, it's chaos. It's crazy time. How do we start to think about that as the base principle? It doesn't mean there's no security. It doesn't mean, data goes everywhere, but it changes your perspective. And so now you're the security team out there going, all right, they're going to start adopting this stuff like crazy. How do I work to figure out what are the top things they need and give them options? Like, hey, if you're going to try to do X, here's a great way to do it. Instead of doing this is a safer way. And you're putting these ways of making it easier. Oh, you want to access data. Here's the secure way to access data. Here's our approved MCP endpoint for your AI connectivity. And I think that's really where we're going to be. And kind of to summarize, security isn't about slowing down if you do it right. Like the reason we have self-driving cars, the reason I will take a Waymo to my next meeting, a self-driving car, is because security enabled it to be safe to go faster, not because security slowed it down.
Now you mentioned AI, and I find it very interesting because a lot of execs are sort of speaking out of how AI is going to replace jobs and take over jobs, and it's sort of more of a doom and gloom. How do you view AI, and what are things people or CISOs can do to actually embrace it instead of fighting it?
Yeah, it will take over activities that did not require as much thinking, and it was prior to this a human had to do it. So if you as a human, if that was all you were capable of, you will be in a hard spot. But I have more faith in humanity. I know all of us are capable of more. So the more mundane things we did are now going to be automated through AI, and it's going to free us up to do more interesting, creative, deeper thinking items in all of our respective roles. In cybersecurity, this is a huge benefit because I think that we as defenders have been on the failing end for far too long. AI will enable attackers to do more clever things, like the deepfake problem is a huge issue. But on the defense side, we've been drowning in data and telemetry and the inability to process for decades now. This gives us a glimmer of hope of being able to put the pieces together to actually defend ourselves. I think that embracing it from security perspective is a no-brainer. Like all innovation jumps with security, you have to wade through the buzzword hell and the people just slapping it on there. And that's hard, but that's okay. We can do it. As companies, I think you're going to see a really interesting change where when companies embrace it, you're going to see both engineering, of course, using chat code, cursor type enablement for faster code development. But I think you're going to see this interesting reality where non-engineering uses AI. And so I predict there will be this rise of vibe coding apps by knowledge workers. So instead of just having them crank out Excel spreadsheets with cool macros, they're going to create applications and start to ask IT or others like, hey, where's our endpoint so I can connect up to this so my AI app can start processing data. That's going to be a bit of a head exploding moment, but it's going to help us. We just have to figure out how to wrap our heads around it to do that reasonably safely.
And now just going back sort of where you started off on the offensive side and then you switched to the defense. What sort of made you switch to the defense?
I think that oddly, it's easier to attack. Finding the one flaw. Yeah, finding the one flaw.
Yep, I'm with you, my friend. People get mad at me. My pen testing friends get mad, but I agree with you. Yes.
Yeah, finding the one mistake that they made amongst all of their different systems and servers, it's thrilling and it's exciting. I remember that energy hit. But it occurred to me like how do we systemically stamp this out? And it took me across all sorts of different paths. When I was leading security at Mozilla, one of the biggest gains that we actually made in the web security space was not developer education about how to secure code more securely. It was actually going to the framework and fundamentally changing the base principles of how the framework was configured. And we stamped out issues with insecure cookies and cross-site scripting issues. And on the other hand, like thinking about how do you mobilize a company like Twitter to keep moving forward quickly, but have some semblance of risk management. I guess, to answer your question, it felt more fulfilling and it felt like a bigger challenge. And that's really what drew me there, because maybe the dark view of this is the system all works because the bad guys make more money by staying up. But the other side of that perspective is if we can enable amazing innovations in technology, like there's all sorts of great things we can do. Like the self-driving cars is one, like, rockets, quantum, everything that's happening, it will only happen if we can do it safely. And when you imagine plugging our brains into this or plugging our life story into AI, which we're already doing, how do you think about like edge LLMs to do local processing for your data? How do you think about a secure enclave if it goes somewhere else? All of this is very fascinating to me, and it's for the betterment of the world when you're on the defensive side.
Yep. And as you said, offense is easy, defense is hard. And I find that a lot of the ways to break into a system are pretty similar. Do you see pen testing sort of becoming almost commoditized and obsolete moving forward, or do you still think that's a viable career field? Because I sort of think pen testing is going to be taken over a lot by AI, and it's not as viable if you want to make a lot of money. For people that are in security or transitioning, what do you think? Should they stay in pen testing or should they be switching over to defense?
I think I'll just clarify that. When I say offense is easy, it's easier in respect to protecting an entire organization. I still have the utmost respect for the trade craft. That is for sure. I think that the days of individuals scouring over website, requests and responses, and Nmap scans and pulling up Metasploit, etc. I think that may decline, and that will be replaced by the machines. And so, in that world, it's the puppeteers, the operators of the machines, that are going to have the bigger roles. So if you are figuring out the new attack path through a research perspective and then executing that at scale through a fleet of agentic AI workers that are doing the red teaming, I think that is the likely future. There will be a small niche field of, the SEAL team that goes in there to really think deeply about something very new, but that's going to be a smaller and smaller segment. I think that you should 100% go through a virtual hacking course, like having hands-on keyboard and actually exploiting a SQL injection, cross-site scripting, a buffer overflow. All of those things for me were incredibly instrumental to solidify my knowledge and make it real. And then you go fix it and you see why it works. 100% do that. But I think if you look at the field and how it will progress, I think those are things to keep in mind, that you'll become more of an automation master in the red teaming space rather than a hands-on keyboard, hardcore red teamer as a career.
Nice. So as we wrap up, we have about a minute left. So I'll pose you with one of the hardest questions, but you got about a minute or two to answer it. Is a cyber war inevitable? And what can CISOs do to protect and secure their organizations from cyber attacks?
I think that the reality is that in the geopolitical landscape, conflict and shades of war are inevitable. History tells us as such. And in war and conflict, all different methods are considered. So I think the fact of whether or not they would come from a technological perspective is guaranteed. The challenge that we face in this reality, though, especially in the United States, is to date, we have said to corporations across the country, all the way down to mom and pop shops, you are in charge of your cyber defenses. Good luck if Russia and China comes knocking. I think that is a challenging reality to be in. Now, from a technical perspective, it's also difficult to think about how there could be an overlay from the US government to protect them. But nonetheless, we have this challenging perspective. The other thing that I would consider is, if you are running a security program for a company, you are no doubt thinking through your threat adversaries. And those are everything from script kiddies to insiders to nation state adversaries to cyber criminal enterprises. And hopefully at this point you understand them all. I dealt with every one of those categories. I literally dealt with nation state adversaries in the first 6 months at Twitter. And that's another story for another day. But what I would say is, don't get wrapped up in defending against a nation state adversary at first, because odds are they are using an equally easy method to get in that any of your other adversaries would do. So lock down your security program from a risk-based approach first, and then think about this iterative level of an advanced attacker. It is a tough challenge, but I do think that you need to keep perspective and keep a sound program in mind.
Well said, well said. And I'm going to take you up. You said future conversation. I'd love to have you back, my friend. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
You've been listening to Life of a CISO. Join us next week for another exciting episode. And until then, start putting into practice some of the great advice that Michael shared with us. Have a great week, my friends.